Hello. Okay. Yeah. Welcome. This is Points of Information in BP Debating. I think the purpose of the SSDC videos is to create like a series of timeless introductions to basics of debating. So hence Points of Information. I'm Cara. I'm a debater from St Andrews. As you can tell by the slide, I clearly have a passion for graphic design. So this is my illustration of points of information. Yeah, so I think if we get into this. Okay, great. This is more graphic design. I think this is what my intention is, to give you the skills in order to be this in a debate. For those of you who are unaware, on the left hand side is William Smith, who is the training officer for the SSDC. And I think that's mid-Euros speech, so there you go. Great, okay, so some brief what this presentation is going to be. So I'm going complete basics, so what actually is a POI, what are the rules, how do you give POIs, what kind of techniques should you adopt, and then how to receive POIs, and then finally just some crucial takeaways. I think if you end up having any questions after this debate, after this presentation, then feel free to add in a little comment on the YouTube, and I'm sure whoever manages it will reply to it. Alternatively, if you can find my social media, you can feel free to try and ask me questions that way. It should be super clear though. This is just the basics. I think the only thing that I would say actually is learning and giving points of information, like a lot of things in debating, are quite personal in terms of how you go about it, how you do it. So I think I'm going to highlight which things I think are like the absolute godly rules that I think everyone should follow, and then which is just kind of my personal opinion and the techniques that I try to adopt. But yeah, getting into it. Okay, so super basic rules. What are POIs? It stands for points of information. If you don't know that, there you go. That's what it stands for. Its intention is to be just a kind of a question or a statement that is given. So the basic rules consist of, you have a 15-second limit to give your POI. General rule of thumb is that it should not be taking 15 seconds to get across your message. You should be able to do it in a shorter amount of time. I'll give you some techniques on how to ensure that does happen. But yeah, so 15 minutes is the absolute max. You can give points of information if it's a 7-minute speech, which most BP speeches are, between the 1st and 6th minute. So that is in the unprotected time. Again, the chair or a panelist will be keeping time, and there should be a bell. As always, it is recommended that you have your own timer next to you so you can be aware of that. And then I think sometimes there's a bit of a confusion whether it should be a comment or a question, or it can be either. It can be either. I know that in Model United Nations or other forms of debating, it has to be a question for it to be valid. That is not necessarily true in debating. It can be either comment or question. So you don't actually have to accept POIs, so that's quite important. It's probably a bad idea to accept every POI that is offered to you. Broadly speaking, you should be accepting 2 to 3 across your team, or about 1 or 2 per speech. And then following up on that, in terms of offering POIs, there's something called badgering. This is bad. This is essentially where you just like continuously offer points of information to a speaker. That is not allowed. A general rule of thumb is that I think that you should probably be leaving about 15 seconds between each point of information that you offer. That allows you for enough time. That being said, if you're just continuously offering points of information, that's generally poor form and quite rude to the speaker who is probably trying to get across an interesting point. It is also probably just bad for you because it means that you're not actually listening to what they're saying if you're so intent on trying to ask them this POI. So badgering is not only just bad technique in terms of your own capacity to understand and respond to arguments being made, but it is also in the judge rules considered something that is worth penalising over. And then a point of information is different from what is called a point of clarification. A point of clarification should be asked, I think it's broadly speaking, probably only going to be asked either in the Prime Minister's speech or in maybe the Leader of the Opposition, and it serves to sort of clarify what the policy or some point of the debate is. I think it's important to know that it's a clarification, so you're asking them like, what group of people does this apply to, or what actually is your policy that you're introducing. The point is not to be asking like a kind of a question that puts forward like an opinion or is meant to challenge the speaker like a point of information would. Some people will disguise points of information as clarifications. I don't think that there's actually any means of penalizing this. I do hate it though, so I would prefer it if you didn't do it. So these are the general basics of points of information. I think the only other thing that I would say is why you should give and why you should receive POIs. I'm noticing a lot in novice debates particularly that people seem quite reticent to give or to take points of information, actually more the former rather than the latter. I think broadly speaking it's just about being able to develop the skills to quickly understand and think of a response to an argument. Is maybe something that is kind of scary to people. I think that what I would say is it's a necessary means of engaging with other people in a debate, so it does count in your favour to give POIs to people, so you should just be doing it for that reason. Additionally, I think particularly in terms of like opening half, closing half interactions, it's crucially important, and maybe perhaps novices don't realise that this is the case, but like if you're opening government, you have the opportunity in your DPM speech to be directly responding to the arguments offered in opposition. You don't get that opportunity with your closing teams. So your only opportunity for that actual direct engagement is through points of information. This is why you really need to be responding to it. So you need to be continuing to pay attention during the whole debate. And then vice versa, whilst in closing you do have the opportunity to be responding within your speeches to your opening half, you want to give them the opportunity to be engaging with you as well, because that does count in your favour. Like a reminder that debates are not won or lost based on the merits of the points in and of themselves, but rather how points and individual teams interact with each other and take it over each other, right? Someone doesn't just win a debate outright, someone takes it over their other teams that are present. This is only happening through engagement. I think a lot of people think that it's unlikely that you'll win or lose a debate by points of information alone. And whilst I think that is probably like broadly for the most part true, it's not it's not a kind of absolute rule. I think it's important to note the fact that I think I have won a debate based on a point of information that has been given by my team, or rather I have taken it over another team because of that point of information interaction that happened. I think that's crucially important for everyone to understand, is that actually every form of engagement is important and should be understood as such. Oh, and then final point is it's not a conversation. I think this is only done by those who are very new, but when you give a point of information, that is the only time that you speak, and then they get to respond to it. It's not an opportunity for you to stand up afterwards and be like, actually that's not what I was asking, or like, no, that you're wrong. You can say that in your own speech and time, but it's important that you don't initiate dialogue there. Your chair will shout at you and it might make you sad. But yeah, these are the absolute basics. These are the kind of holy grail rules. Okay, how to give points of information. Right, first rule. People at St Andrews make fun of me for this because I did a presentation about points of information last year, and throughout the entire presentation I continuously shouted, write down your POIs. And if there's one rule of thumb that I can say is the most helpful thing for any debater at any level, is writing down your points of information is, I think, the best advice that I can give to make sure that it's concise, that you're getting to the point, that it is clear in the way that it is given, and therefore will be received and actually have to be responded to. But also I think it helps you narrow down when it's an important thing to say, like whether it's an important thing to say or not. Additionally, sometimes speakers will say not right now, when you offer them a point of information, and then they'll take you like 40 seconds later. It is so embarrassing if you then have to stand up and say, I have forgotten it, and come up with something on the fly that is not like a useful means of engagement for either of you. So if there's anything that you take away from this presentation, it is that you should write down your points of information. It's a hard thing to get people to do, I think, mainly because you think, this is something that I want to say. This is like a great response, and you get super eager and you just put your hand up straight away and you think, oh, if I don't offer it now, then I won't get another opportunity. That's not true, because of the fact that taking points of information is something that is specified as necessary in the judge handbook. People will take a point of information, and so if you have something written down that you think is genuinely good, when someone calls on you to give them a point of information, you can actually stand up and offer them something that is a genuine form of engagement and that actually could do quite well for you and your team. That is infinitely superior to just like continuously offering the first thing that comes into your head. This is the technique that I think got me to realise that points of information can actually be quite fun to give and take, but also actually useful and necessary forms of kind of taking down or interacting with arguments. So if you take anything away from this presentation, it's you should write down your points of information. Great, okay. Types of point of information. There's no hard and fast rule about this. Like, these are not kind of well-known classifications that everyone uses in terms of points of information. This is just kind of the 3 categories that I think are useful and I've narrowed down in order to kind of discuss. So the first, I think, is generally destructive points of information. These are like lethal rebuttals or pointing out kind of logical fallacies or exceptions to a case. In terms of the first, lethal rebuttals, I think oftentimes when you hear an argument, you can come up with like a response in your head and you think, oh, I am hot shit, that is a fantastic point of rebuttal, and then you think, yeah, I'm going to say it. This is when writing it down is useful, because it means that actually if it is a useful point of rebuttal, if you're like a closing team responding to an opening and they don't take a point of information from you, then you can use it within your speech. Most of the time, however, you'll realise that like your first response or your first your first sort of thought when it comes to like, this is good rebuttal, is probably actually not as good as you think it is. And so it's useful to have that kind of like time when you're writing it down to think it through. So the reason that I've included lethal rebuttal here is because, generally speaking, I think it's probably a bit of a waste of a point of information to offer something that is like mitigation at best, that doesn't actually take down an argument, but rather just says, oh, well, your argument isn't quite as powerful as you think it is, right? Because they can respond to that and say, like, these are the flaws of your rebuttal. They've got probably infinitely more time, well, not infinitely, they've got more than 15 seconds to respond to your point of information, whereas you only have 15 seconds to make that rebuttal. If you're an opening team and you think that this is the best way that you can interact with your closing, then maybe this is like a suitable thing to do anyway. But broadly speaking, I think I would say that lethal rebuttal or rebuttal points of information are best given when you're sure that this is a genuine and good attack on a case. The second point, these are the best points of information to give, these are the most fun, is usually it's something like offering like a particular exception to a case, like if someone's making some kind of grand or even like genuinely good case, and they're saying that it kind of is universally applicable. If you can think of a good example that you think a judge will agree with or empathize with, that is contrary to the thing that they are trying to point out, then a point of information is a fantastic opportunity for you to give this and for you to say, actually, this is wrong, or like, do you agree with this thing? And then if they say yes, they've got a fundamental tension in their case. So I think these are quite useful and often do rely on things called intuition pumps. That's when you say something that kind of feeds into an intuition that most people probably have, including the average intelligent voter, which is who the judges are impersonating. So an example of this is a point of information that I've given recently in a debate. Someone was making this claim that morality is entirely self-defined and therefore moral acts are only moral or immoral if you deem it so. So I said in a point of information, is it genuinely or broadly immoral for me to have murdered your dog? not the kind of best example of this, but I was trying to kind of feed into the intuition that, broadly speaking, I think most people would consider just killing a dog, like an innocent animal, like a pet, it is probably considered like generally bad. And so that was the kind of engagement that was happening. Didn't serve me particularly well in this debate, but we'll get onto that. I'm coming back to this example. Those are the fun ones though, because you can ask kind of like, if your grandmother was a bike, would she have wheels kind of question, or had wheels, is she a bike? It feels like you're kind of doing that kind of thing. It's where you can ask those more specific and quite fun questions. The second category that we're talking about is engagement or rebuilding points of information. Again, that's such a broad title that perhaps I should have narrowed down, but I couldn't think of anything better. Broadly speaking, this can be you kind of putting your hand, offering a point of information and demanding some kind of weighing to be done from a speaker. Like, maybe your point is true, but my point is equally true, and I think that it has more significant outcomes than yours, therefore engage with this and tell me why yours is more important than mine, kind of weighing. I'm sure that there'll probably be a video on weighing if you don't know what that is. If there's not a video about weighing, then this is my call to the SSDC to make a video about weighing. Second point within this is like reminding people that they need to engage. If you're in opening half and a closing speaker, or like particularly a whip speaker, is summarizing or going case by case, and you think that they've not suitably engaged with your arguments, then you can remind them to do this in a point of information. I think that that's fine to do. I think most judges are actually quite good at picking up when someone's not engaged with arguments or isn't engaging, properly with arguments. So you probably don't need to do this. You also mildly run the risk of them like reminding them to engage and then them like engaging really well and just taking down your case. Whereas if they don't engage, your case probably still stands. So I think I would be careful about when to deploy this. This particular kind of point of information. I think it's probably better for you to be talking about like weighing demands and offering weighing within your point of information. Cool. Third classification is the closing specific reference. This is actually more kind of like closing, opening, engagement relationships. This is more that I think that it's important for like opening and closing teams to have that point of information interaction with them. If you've ever been in a debate and someone and the Prime Minister has said like, I'll take a POI from closing, and been surprised about that, because that's not necessarily something that happens as much at schools, or if you've never done debating before and were surprised at the specific demand, the reason for that is that kind of cross top bottom interaction there. But what can you do as a closing team specifically in a point of information? Well, there's two things you can do, both of which fall under the same kind of idea, is that you can offer a point of information that indicates the extension that you're going to run, or alternatively, and this is one of my favorite things to do if I'm in closing and extending, is to offer red herrings to teams about alternative extensions that you could be running. The reason for this is because, so the reason why you might want to indicate a genuine extension is if you think that perhaps the kind of diagonal is where your kind of most competitive clashes. So if you think that if you're closing opposition and opening government is probably like the most threatening team in the debate, most able to engage with you properly, you might want to indicate your extension to them to give them an opportunity to respond so that you can create your extension to be that much better. I think alternatively, if you think that you want to just flag it up at the top of the debate to let people know that this is your idea that you're introducing, perhaps that's also a genuinely good thing to do. The risk that you run through doing this is you can potentially have, or if you indicate and then your opening team thinks, oh, that's actually a really good idea, and they can write the argument really fast and come up with it and do that in their speech, you do run the risk of having opening take any good extension that you may have. This is one of the reasons why running a red herring or like flagging a red herring is quite a useful example, sorry, a useful POI to do. It can offer your opening an opportunity to maybe waste time or offer that kind of point because they think think that it's important. And secondly, it can also be an opportunity for the top half, the diagonal, to engage with that kind of red herring argument. Whether that's good faith in a debate, I'm not one to tell you. I think, broadly speaking, the point of information should be like a good and relevant engagement with what speakers are kind of introducing and with the themes and clashes that are in the debate. Don't just say something absolutely batshit and think that's a kind of particularly useful or legitimate thing to be doing in a debate. Great. That's the kind of basic outlines of how to give a point of information. Again, if there's anything that you take away from this, it's that I think you should be writing down POIs. I will say that every day until I die or retire from debating. Fabulous. Okay, how to receive points of information. I think this is quite hard. This is something that I struggle with still. Is when you get sort of points of information, like understanding how best to respond to them, how to give them enough credence. I think there's a few rules that can be helpful with this, but again, I think this is one of those things that you're going to get more comfortable with the more practice that you do and the more kind of points of information that you receive and respond to. Another thing that's quite good to do is to note how other people respond to points of information and seeing when that works and when it doesn't. So if you offer someone a point of information and listen to their response, which you should always be doing, seeing why it's good or bad is quite a useful means of then implementing that when you are responding to points of information yourself. Additionally, if you're receiving one point of information every speech, sometimes two, across the course of like even one competition, that's quite a lot of point of information that you're responding to. And so, yeah, you just kind of get significantly better the more that you take and the more time and credence that you give. So first rule, actually, this is maybe unhelpful. The best way that you can respond to points of information, or the best way that you can know to respond to what points of information are, is I think that it starts in prep time. You should know what the responses and immediate arguments are, or counter arguments are to your own case, and you should be working this out and discussing this with your partner in prep time. So again, I'm sure that there'll be a video at some point on how to do prep effectively, or if you are like training, then maybe you have a training session on it. But I think that broadly speaking, it's actually really important to know the kind of clashes that exist within the debate, so the things that people are going to be disagreeing on, and then also to workshop your case around what you think immediate responses are going to be. So if I'm making a case about zoos, this is a legitimate motion now, this House have banned zoos. If I'm making a case about the fact that I think that zoos are bad because they're exploitative, that's one, to animals, I should know what the immediate opposition cases are going to be to that, because I should have been discussing that when I was constructing my case in prep time. So if one of you is being kind of devil's advocate and countering each argument that is being made, that's a useful way to understand what responses are going to be to your argument. And 9 times out of 10, doing that in prep time means that when you get a POI in a debate to your case, you are probably already aware of what it is, and you should be aware of what a good response is to that. So this is when you watch debates and you see someone say, I knew that this was going to be said, this is my like 6 mechanisms as to why that's not true. The reason that they are capable of doing that is not because they're like really good on the fly. Maybe they are, that's probably quite rare. Most of the time they'll have already anticipated that that is going to be the case and will have done some work in prep time to come up with defenses of their argument. I think that this is really important. Again, this is also important for those points of information that are talking about like exceptions to your case. I'll get into some sort of more detail about how to respond to things like that later, but broadly speaking, you should know what the limitations of your case are. So if it has exceptions, you should be aware of what those are going into it. All this comes with the caveat that sometimes prep can be chaotic and you don't know what's happening, especially when you're a novice. And sometimes people are just like capable of seeing arguments in your case, like weaknesses in your case that you're not. And so sometimes you will get points of information that you haven't anticipated. And so there are general strategies that you can adopt, which I'll talk about now, which are kind of against that. So Before we get into that, how to receive a POI, so how many to take. I've already said this, but I think generally speaking 2 to 3 per team. This is like 1 or 2 per speech. I think that it's up to you to figure out whether you want to take more than one point of information. It'll be dependent on the case that you're running, and on the kind of the debate itself and how kind of complex it is. I err on the side of 1 rather than 2 points of information unless I'm feeling particularly excited, and then I might take 2. But broadly speaking, I would say sort of 1. When to take in your speech. So most people will probably end up taking a point of information within the 5th minute. So whether that's like sort of 5 minutes, sort of 20 seconds ish. A lot of people do end up taking them at the kind of 5:50 mark. This is a bad idea. I would say that a general rule of thumb that you should try and stick to is to to take a point of information at around 3 minutes 30 to 4 minutes 30 within your speech. The reason, this is under the caveat that it's a 7-minute speech, by the way. The reason that this is the case is that it gives you enough time to be able to respond effectively to a good point of information, whilst also giving you time to then move back to your own case and to continue and to conclude it. That means that you are actually able to properly engage and also to then weigh up anything within your speech, or to finish making your case, or kind of make an additional case on that. I think that that's really important. That being said, sometimes you get lost in your speech, or you need to finish like your main point or your like characterization of the debate before you can take a point of information. Like if you're Prime Minister, for example, and you've got quite a hefty characterization and sort of setup that you want to do for the debate, it might not be possible to take it at the 3:30 mark because you might not have made any actual arguments that can be responded to. So it is dependent on the kind of speech that you're making and the kind of speaker that you are as well. I would say that earlier in the speech is better, and that's not at like 1 minute, but earlier is probably better, just because of that kind of caveat of if you receive a point of information that is actually incredibly good, it might be very useful for you to have that additional time to work and respond to that point of information. Or if you can't do that, if you leave it till 5:50 and then you receive a point of information that just decimates everything that you spent 6 minutes building, then you're going to have to spend like that last protected minute of your speech trying to fumble to engage with that kind of point of information. And maybe you're capable, but I know for myself that I am not, my brain doesn't work that fast. I'm not capable of that kind of argumentation. Additionally, it's probably just impossible to be able to respond to a genuinely good POI in less than a minute. I think that that's crucial to know. So the general rule of thumb is, I would say, to take it earlier. From who? We've already gone over this, that I think that kind of diagonal engagement is probably the most important. So I think that generally speaking, if you're top half, you should be taking it from closing, and if you're closing, you should be taking it from opening to get that kind of engagement. That being said, I think that if you're capable of reading the debate and knowing who the closest competitor is, it is possible that might be a better means for you of interaction for you. So if you know that you're kind of, if you're closing government and the top half has been incredibly messy and none of them have really made any genuinely good points in your opinion, and that you think that you've probably just outweighed both of them already within your extension case, it might be more meaningful for you to interact with the closing opposition in that case. I think that's quite a risky game to play unless you're good at analysing the debate, and I think if you're new to or early in your university debating career, you probably aren't going to be able to do that just yet. If you get like kind of more equipped at judging, or if you do a lot of like whip speeches and you're quite good at reading the room, then maybe you might want to start sort of thinking about implementing that. But I think for now, I would advise on just kind of working with that diagonal comparison. Again, if you're like closing and your top half is just not offering you any POIs, then take it from closing. That's not to say that like diagonal or death, like you should be taking points of information regardless. Great. How to respond. Cool. Few rules of thumb. 1, traps. Traps are everywhere. This is in reference to the points of information that I was discussing earlier, where I'm saying when someone comes up and offers you like an intuition pump, to just go with the immediate thing that you think is true might not actually be a great idea, because it might be more, it will be better for you to stick with the lines of your case. I once had a partner who asked someone if they thought that lying about a friend's grandmother's death was a good idea, and the speaker that they asked it to immediately responded and said, no, you shouldn't lie to them about that. That was a contradiction that was then introduced into their case, and I think that that's really important. The dog example that I gave earlier, the response to that was actually, no, I don't think that it is broadly or truly immoral for you to have murdered my dog. If you think that that was a moral act, then that was a moral thing to do, and because morality is self-defined, in reference to the case that they were making at that point. But that's why the point of information didn't work, because they were capable of taking a second to think past the immediate intuition that was triggered and to think, what is this, how is this true in reference to my case? Like, how do I have to work with this in reference to my case? I think so. The first thing that I would say is just be careful and don't fall into any traps that points of information are setting you up to. The second thing, sometimes people just give bad points of information. You won't, because you've watched this presentation and because you're writing down your POIs. But some people will just stand up and say the first thing that comes to their head. Sometimes people will say things without thinking about it. Sometimes people will ramble on for 15 seconds and you'll have no clue what they're saying. I think most of the time it's actually okay to admit when you think that a point of information hasn't really made a lot of sense to you. That being said, you have to treat them in good faith. So if they've worded it badly, but you know the general kind of thing that they're saying, respond to the best outcome, like respond to the best thing that they could have said, right? So this is treating things in good faith. You should be doing that with points of information. Do not be dismissive over people. But I think that broadly speaking, if you think a point of information just is really bad, it probably is, and you're probably not like missing some grand thing. Sometimes someone might stand up and be like, oh, they missed the point of my excellent and massively like intellectual point of information. But to be honest, you and the judge are probably on the same wavelength and probably didn't understand it when it was given. And I think it's okay to know that that is true and that that is the case. But a general rule of thumb is to treat things in good faith. I think that that's really important. That being said, don't get bogged down responding to things. So if someone offers you a point of information and you think, I can take this down super easily, do it and then move on. There's no need to stay on something for like a really long period of time talking about it in loads of depth. Additionally, if you just don't have a good response to it, don't get bogged down in trying to fumble through like a kind of 2-minute response to what was a 15-second POI. I think it's probably just more effective for your time to come up with a shorter response that might be slightly insufficient and move on than to just ramble for 2 minutes and likely not to come to any genuinely decent response because you've not really thought about it. You've just been rambling and panicking in response. It's better to think about things and to take the time to think about things. So how to respond when you don't know how to respond is the main kind of point that I want to make here. 4 principles here. 1, timing is helpful. I've said this already, but receiving it earlier in the speech gives you the time to kind of like either toss to later in the speech if you need to, or gives you the time to respond effectively to points of information. Second, actually no, there's 5 points here. Second point is again this anticipation thing that I was talking about earlier. I think that it's probably important to have known what the clashes are. So even if you don't know how to respond directly to this point, you can probably understand where the debate is going if you've done that appropriate anticipation. Third, this is a good strategy to adopt, is to sort of try and do some weighing within your response. So if someone makes a point that is contrary or directly responds to something that you've said and you think it's probably true, but you think that your point is also still probably true, you can do some weighing. So you can say, yeah, maybe you're correct, but this is way more significant. Like the point that I'm making is way more significant because of X, Y, Z. Or I think that mine is significantly more likely because of X, Y, Z, or your thing is unlikely to actually happen because of X, Y, Z. Having that weighing mechanism is quite good means of saying, of attacking a point of information. I think that if you can't take it down immediately, that's a good strategy to adopt. Okay, 4th point, yes. you can attack the premise of the point of information. So if you think that actually the point is good, but you don't really know where they're coming from, or rather if they're coming from what seems like quite a shaky assumption, you can tackle those assumptions and say, because that assumption is not true, I don't think that this POI stands in the debate. Context dependent, difficult to explain in abstract, but I hope you know what I'm talking about. And then final strategy, if you're the first speaker and you really don't know how to respond to this point of information, you can say, actually, that's something that my partner is going to be talking about, or you could offer like a brief response and then say, my partner will talk about this in more depth, and just toss it to them and have, because they have the kind of like luxury of having a significantly larger amount of time to be able to respond. And that being said, I think that that strategy is quite transparent. I think most people know that that probably means that you just don't have a good response to it. That's like the kind of last resort that you should be taking. Yeah, that's generally the kind of rule about how you should go about receiving points of information. So there's kind of two principles here. The first is how to receive is that you should know which point of information you'll probably be getting. You should understand your case and how it situates itself in the debate and how other people are going to see it and respond to it. And then the other half there is responding when you don't immediately have that kind of predetermined or pre-understood response. And I think the thing that I would say is weighing is a really crucial metric and a really crucial strategy to be adopting here. Points of information, as I said at the beginning of this, are difficult to respond to a lot of the time, and so I think it's quite important that you do practice that as much as possible, and that you do that kind of observation that I was talking about. Okay, so that's it. Like I said at the beginning, this is a super basic introduction to points of information. Within this, I think, exists some debating principles that are just things that you should be like trying to adopt anyway. So the weighing metrics and that I talked about last in the kind of how to receive, anticipation and being able to understand a debate before it's happening. Again, if you're capable of doing that, that's when you start to kind of really see success in debating. It's all about knowing the kind of argumentations, or rather the clashes and the responses that things are going to be getting before they happen. That's a crucial thing to do. I think that the other thing that I would say is understanding and being able to respond quickly to things is important, but also being able to interact and having that massive engagement between teams is crucial. Engagement exists beyond points of information, but I think that people really undervalue their kind of use in debating. They're also just really fun. I think that when you're like in Prime Minister, there's a tendency to think, oh, this is going to get really boring. After my speech, I speak first for 7 minutes, and then there's like X number of minutes afterwards. I'm not good at maths. That are happening, like, and it's such a long time for me to sit there, and it's so boring. If you're paying attention and you're listening to people speaking, and then you're with the kind of the principle of I'm going to be giving a point of information at some point, that's quite a good way of interacting in the debate and staying kind of conscious and not just zoning out. It means that you're giving your full attention to the other people in the debate, but it also means that you're remaining relevant and important throughout it. That's true regardless of what speaking position you're in. I think that points of information are just fun to give. And if you can take anything away from this presentation, like I said, it's write down your bloody POIs. It's such a game changer in terms of knowing when they're good and when they're bad. And it also means that when you say like fun stuff, you've got it written down and you can keep it for afterwards. And it can be immortalized in what I assume everyone has, where they keep all of their debate notes in a nice box. I think mine's up there. So yeah, that's everything that I have to say. Yeah, so good luck at your debating competitions, and particularly anyone going to Bogwall who's watching this before it happens on the 22nd of October. I look forward to seeing you there, and I look forward to hearing your good POIs.